Okay, so I wanted you to be able to see the difference between the different kinds. So the first thing I want to talk to you about is the square root. When are you going to do the square root? When you just see an x squared, or you just see an x quantity squared. That's when you're going to square root. But if you look here, you're going to factor when you have an x squared and an x. So if you look here, you see they have something the same. They both have an x. So if they both have an x, that's when you're going to do your 1 by and break down. So you would go 3xx, negative 5x, x, whoosh. I need you to always look at this one first. That's the first thing I would do right off the bat. So I would go, hey, do they have something the same? If they don't, it's something else. Now this letter B is a little bit tricky because it is the square root. So you could do it by factoring or you could do it by solving. And let me show you what I mean by that. So if you look at this one, you could do two ways. You could do 9x squared minus 16, set it equal to 0, so you add 16, divide by 9. 9 doesn't go into 16, so you leave it a fraction. Then this is when you square root, square root. The square root of 16 is 4, the square root of 9 is 3, plus or minus x equals. Or I could, quote, factor it by doing the same thing. Square root of 9x is 3x. Square root of 16 is 4. One gets a plus, one gets a minus. Then when you set it equal to 0, and you subtract 4, x equals negative 4/3. And this is x equals positive 4/3. So I want you to see in this case, it's a little bit tricky because it could fall into the factor category or the square root category, whatever feels more comfortable to you. Both ways, positive and negative, whatever's easiest to you, for you, I should say. Okay. The next one is guess and check. This is when you're trying to find two numbers that multiply and two numbers that add. So in this case, two numbers that multiply to get 12 and add to 4, or 6 and 2. Since this is negative, the bigger guy's negative. Now, if I just asked you to factor, you would be done. But if I ask you to set it equal to 0 and solve it, x equals 6, x equals negative 2. Now, I'd like to point out, if this negative 12 wasn't even there, then it would be, hey, they have something the same. If the x wasn't there, and it was x squared minus 4, it would now be a square root. Notice the difference. Okay, the hard guess and check. The hard guess and check isn't as easy. So what you're going to do, that's why it's called hard guess and check. So 3x squared is 3x and x. The only way to get 2 is 2 times 1. So what you do is you go 2, 3 times 1 is 3. 2 plus 3 gives me 5, but I'm trying to get a 7. So now I'm going to switch the spots. I'll put a 1 here and a 2 here. 1 times x is 1x. 3 times 2 is 6. 1 plus 6 is 7. The problem is it's negative 7, so they both have to be negative. Then I would set it equal to 0. This would give me 1/3, and this would give me 2. Okay? Factored form. Factored form means it's already done for you. So all you got to do now is solve it. So if this doesn't have a parenthesis, you give it a parenthesis. So that would be x equals 0. And this would be x equals negative 4. For this one, they're just both going to be fractions. Add 7, divide by 2. Subtract 1, divide by 5. And there's the other one. Okay? So now that we know all these types, I'm going to put a problem up, and your job is to decipher what you would do in the problem. Okay? So I'll do 5 examples. All right? So I'll put this to the side. And let me write down the problem, the first one. X squared minus 9 equals 0. So if you look, do they have anything the same? No. Oh, there's an x squared. So I can add 9 to both sides. And then, boom, I can square root. But technically, if it's a square root thing, that means I could have also factored. So I could go x minus 3, x plus 3, and that gives me x equals 3. X equals negative 3. Okay? So there's the first example, number 1. Number 2. Fold this. Your job is to decipher what type of factoring is it. All right, so square root again. So the same thing. I could add 9 to both sides, divide by 4. Now, boom, square root, square root. I can't take divide 4 into 9, so x equals plus or minus 3 over 2. I could have also done factoring. 4x is 2x, 9 is 3, one's positive, one's negative, subtract 3, divide by 2, add 3, divide by 2. Okay? Let's try the next one. And I'm going to show you how they're very similar so you can compare. Now we have 4x squared minus 15x plus 9 equals 0. Okay? So let's look here. If the 9 wasn't there, they would both have an x and they would be something the same, but they don't. It's not a square root because there's 3 of them. It's not easier guess and check because there isn't a number in front. So there is a number in front, so boom, I got to do the hard guess and check. So I have 2 options. It could be 4x and x, or it could be 2x and 2x, because both those cases will give me 4x. Now I have to look at the 9. That's 9 times 1 and 3 times 3. So I'll try 3 and 3 right down here first. That gives me 6, and that gives me 6. That's not going to give me 15. So I don't need to switch them because they're exactly the same. So 3 and 3 is out. Let's try 1 and 9. And when you get really good at it, you start to get the game. And then you see it a little bit quicker. This would give me 1 times 2 is 2. 2 times 9 is 18. 18 and 2 won't give me 15. So if I switch them, which I really don't need to do because they're both 2x, but whatever. 18 and 2 won't give me 15, so that guy's out. So now I'll try this. 3 and 3. This is 3x. This is 12. If I add 3 plus 12, it gives me 15, but only if they're both negative. So this is my answer. I set it equal to 0. Add 3, divide by 4. Add 3, and I'm done. Let's do another one. 4x minus 9 squared equals 0. This one reminds me of this one right here. But in order for me to be able to square root, I have to get rid of the 4. So I divide by 4. Anything divided by 0 is 0. Square root, square root. X minus 9 equals 0. I don't need to write plus or minus. So technically, in this case, I only have one answer. But that's really because if you add 0 or subtract 0, it's still the same thing. Notice how I keep using the same numbers to help you find patterns. Let's do one more. X squared equals 9x minus 20. Now, if this problem didn't have this, then this would be the square root. But since it has the x, it reminds me of guess and check. But in order to do that, I need to set it equal to 0. Set everything equal to 0. So I move this over by doing the opposite. I move this over by doing the opposite. And now I find that multiply to get 20 and add to get negative 9. And 5 times 4 gives me 20. And a negative make a positive. So x equals 5 and x equals 4. Okay? I want to show you the 5 problems I just did so you can see how they relate to one another. I tried to keep consistently using an x squared. I tried to use 4 as often as possible. So for this one, it was square root, or it could have been square root factor. This was square root. It could have also been square root factor. This was the hard guess and check. This was the square root. And this was the guess and check, but you had to set it equal to 0. Hopefully that helps.